give them some time.
This meeting is being recorded.
As people enter into the webinar, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping and thank you everyone for attending today, for making this possible. I would like to thank our co-hosts of the American Institute of Architects of St. Louis and the Urban Land Institute of St. Louis with promoting it to their members. I am Rachel Witt. I'm the co-chair of the Public Advocacy Committee for the American Planning Association, St. Louis Metro Section. We have on the call today helping me, my co-chair, Sean Tooley, and also the co-chair of the Communications Committee, Mary Kennedy. We have a couple events coming up that we would love for you to attend. In June, it will be the SLU, St. Louis University Urban Planning and Development Graduate Capstone Presentation on June 15th. It's a Wednesday at 11:30, so stay tuned for details. Also, the 2022 Missouri Planning Conference will be October 5th through 7th, Wednesday through Friday. It'll be live by Lowe's in downtown St. Louis, and visit missouri.planning.org for more information. We are still looking for sponsors, so if you would like to be a sponsor, please let me know. I am the co-chair for the sponsorship committee. You could put it in the chat if you're interested with your contact info, or email me, Rachel, R-A-C-H-E-L @southgrand.org if you would like to be a sponsor. Also, follow us on our social media. We have Twitter, Facebook, and also I mentioned our website. So please follow us on our social media for the St. Louis Metro section. We are going to do a quick poll in a couple minutes because we are very fortunate with our co-hosts today with AIA and ULI that we have over 150 attendees for the Missing Middle Housing webinar. So Mary is going to launch a poll and we would just love to know where you're from and your background.
All right, do we want to, it looks like we've got 54 people in the room so far. Do we want to wait a couple minutes or just get started on the poll?
I guess we can get started on the poll.
Yeah, and then people can take it as they come in. Okay.
Also, while everyone's taking the poll, Mary and I will be assisting with your questions with the Q&A at the end of the panel of discussion. Please put your questions in the chat to help ensure that we don't have duplications of questions. And we'll be asking your questions at the end of all the panelists' presentations.
Okay, great. Looks like we've got almost everyone submitted, so I'm going to go ahead. People are still joining. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end it, and then Rachel, I think you'll be able to see the results.
We have 88% from St. Louis. We have 2% from the Midwest, 4% from the South, 4% from the East, and 2% from the West Coast. The backgrounds, what profession area of interest do you come from? 44% is planning and community development. 21% is architecture and design. 13% is real estate development and financing, and 2% economic development, 4% elected officials, and 15% other. How familiar with missing middle housing concepts are you? Not at all familiar is 13%, somewhat familiar is 44%, familiar is 27%, committed and actively working on addressing missing middle is 15%. Thank you so much for everyone for taking the poll to give us some feedback on who's in the room. Welcome to the Missing Middle Housing webinar. I would like to introduce our moderator for today for the Missing Middle Housing webinar, and that's James A. Moore. He's with Global Solutions, Director of Cities with Jacobs. James has over 30 years of technical and managerial experience and leadership in architecture, urban design, community planning, and urban regeneration. With Jacobs, he is helping lead and expand the company's cities and places practice worldwide, with an emphasis on urban and suburban repositioning, redevelopment, and revitalization. James has a deep understanding of cities as complex systems of systems, in which all component elements are integral to strategy, planning, design, development, and operations. He promotes a comprehensive, multidisciplinary process built on intensive data collection and analysis and broad-based interactive community engagement, looking to balance the physical development of the built and natural environments with sustainable economic growth and continual social cultural advancement. He has particular expertise in organizing and managing large, complex urban and suburban regeneration projects, including those focusing on neighborhood revitalization and the creation of sustainable, accessible, walkable, transit-oriented mixed-use environments. Please help welcome today as our moderator, James A. Moore. Thank you so much, James.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm delighted to be here, and glad we have such a great audience for what is a really, I think, very, very important topic, pretty much for every city around the country. Missing middle housings, what are the challenges and opportunities? We're here to talk about missing middle housing, what it is. It looks like a lot of the people in the audience have some understanding of it, but what it is, why it's important, what is the role it can play in contemporary cities, what are the challenges associated with creating this important component of urban development, and then what are the opportunities going forward. And I think particularly with respect to the opportunities, the panelists today will give you a really good sense of what those might be for cities, very different types of cities around the country. In today's American city, there are really three dominant types of housing. The first of these is single family housing. I think we're all familiar with this. The image on the left sort of shows the idealized or glorified image of what that might be. The image on the right is probably a little closer to the reality that is being produced in most communities, but we're pretty familiar with single family housing. The second dominant form is mid-rise multifamily development. Now, often these are full block apartment developments, mixed use. They include groceries, restaurants, and shops, but typically they require very, very large sites. The designs are often organized around, large, expensive parking decks, and they cater to a pretty defined demographic. These mid-rise apartments have a role to play, but they can't be necessarily the predominant type of non-single family residential. It just doesn't necessarily address the full range of demographics. And then the last type is high-rise residential, whether these are for lease or for sale. And I think, we're all familiar with what those might be. And to some degree, all three types are found in every city in the country, but they are not necessarily the only options for residential demand or what the audience is looking for. And that's where the idea of the missing middle comes in. Missing middle is a commonly used term that refers to the range of housing types that fit between the single family detached and the mid to high rise apartment complex buildings. Examples include duplexes, triplexes, townhomes, and more. I'll show you some examples of those. And then used in this context, the middle actually refers to the size and type of a home relative to its location. It's in the middle of the scale spectrum of housing. The cost of these will vary depending on location, style, size, etc. So the missing middle definition really does not correlate to a particular income bracket. It's more of a physical or formal definition. And I think the panelists today will describe that in some more detail. I also want to give a shout out to Dan Perolik from Opticos out in Berkeley, California. This is Dan's book, Missing Middle Housing. Dan really, I think, has helped popularize the term and really is a leader in this country in terms of the design and application of this. If you have a chance to pick up his book, I think you'll find it incredibly helpful, really well written, really well illustrated, very good reference for anybody who's interested in learning more about this particular development type. And so you see some examples of what might be considered missing middle. As I mentioned, they correlate to the scale and character of many urban neighborhoods. They're typically 2 to 3 stories in height and can contain anywhere from 2 to 4 or even maybe a dozen units. Now, this type of development was really quite common in most urban neighborhoods from the late 19th through the early 20th centuries. And you see these examples. You can see that almost all of them are older examples of development. And typically these buildings would be interspersed with other single family houses, larger mid-rise or even high-rise, and then of course commercial mixed use to create a truly integrated neighborhood. However, we're not building these types of developments today. And that represents, I think, a series of challenges for the missing middle. First challenge is winning over the neighbors. I mean, quite often in an existing single family neighborhood, the homeowners worry that anything that is not single family might lead to a potential decline in property values. So there's a implicit bias against anything that is not necessarily single family. You have to win over the regulators because in many jurisdictions, anything that doesn't fit into the sort of 3 types of major residential is not part of the land development regulations. It may actually even be illegal. So there's the issue of addressing regulatory impediments. And then finally, we have to win over the developers because most developers are very good at single family, very good at mid-rise, very good at high-rise. But these missing middle buildings fall outside of that spectrum. And it's almost as if there's a need to develop or create a new cadre of small local developers oriented towards addressing this challenge. Now, it turns out that has been picked up and noticed. Another wonderful book that recently came out, Building Small by Jim Hyde, talks about how you can begin to develop these buildings that are not necessarily part of the mainstream in terms of the major development types. And again, on the right there, you see an example of the variety of buildings that would fit within this particular spectrum. Now, the opportunities, of course, are enormous. There's an opportunity to diversify housing within an existing neighborhood. We know that the demographics of the single family house, typically the nuclear family, couple parents, a few children living at home, is radically different than the demographic of most cities. So there's an opportunity to address that demographic. There's an opportunity to expand the range of economic types. Many people don't necessarily need a single family house, or they don't want an apartment, but they want something that doesn't fit within those standard niches. It's an opportunity to maintain or even enhance neighborhood character. We saw the scale of some of the older examples. They fit very, very nicely into an existing neighborhood, particularly when you're looking at infill opportunities. And missing middle can really help drive the kind of urban regeneration neighborhood regeneration that many urban cities or urban neighborhoods are looking to create. So there's clearly a huge opportunity for this particular development type. The challenge is, how do we go to that next step and make it something that every city is beginning to see and build on? There are a few examples in this last respect. This comes from Portland. You can see the poster on the left talking about re-legalizing the missing middle housing and the range of types that would fit within that. And then the image on the right is a recently built, it's a little 6-pack. You can see it's 3 stories high, 2 units on each floor, slightly larger perhaps than the scale of a single family building, but very comfortably fitting within the scale of the existing neighborhood. And that's an example of the type of missing middle that I think cities around the country are looking to promote and looking to create. And so with that, I am going to introduce our first speaker, because today's panelists are going to really dive into these topics and help us get a better understanding of how we might achieve them. So our first speaker today is Miriam Keller. She's an AICP. She's a senior planner with Development Strategies, which is an interdisciplinary planning, real estate, and community development advisory firm based in St. Louis. Miriam manages a broad variety of projects at Development Strategies, including housing studies, land use strategies, urban design plans. Almost every project relates to issues of housing, housing affordability, and equitable urban development. She also helps lead engagement strategies that involve community members, policymakers, city officials, nonprofit partners, and other key stakeholders in decision-making processes. And so please join me in welcoming Miriam. Thank you.
Well, great. Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. Good morning, everybody. Super excited to be part of this conversation. So I'll be speaking about missing middle housing in the context of St. Louis, and can it be a greater St. Louis? So I'll quickly be covering a few things. So our housing context and how we fit into national trends. Second, a snapshot of what we already have in terms of these missing middle housing types James described. A snapshot of what we've been building. And then I've identified just, a few opportunities for missing middle in the context of the St. Louis region, and really just a few. And I hope kind of what I share helps get everybody else thinking about others. So what is our context? We'll start with the national context, some of what we've been reading in the headlines the past several years, because there is, a ton of national conversation about escalating home prices and rents, the cost of construction, and the persistent shortage of quality, affordable options for many Americans, but especially renters. As we all know, or many of us know on this call, of course, St. Louis's context is specific. So, how do we stack up? And I've also included Hampton Roads MSA, where our third speaker, Paula, is located. So we have a lower housing cost, lower cost housing market than many other places, and we're slower growing. But while our housing prices haven't been growing quite as rapidly as the nation overall, that 50% growth here is still huge. I think housing options out of reach for many in our community. And even despite our lower housing costs, many renters in our region, this is the metropolitan statistical area here, are under some pretty intense strain and are in housing that costs more than they can afford. That's a very quick scan of our context. And now a quick look at the missing middle stock that we already have. And so, of course, we have very different types of housing in different parts of the region. And I broke things up into a few rough sub areas in the central part of our region and did a quick kind of accounting of how much missing middle is part of our housing picture already. And you can see these middle housing types are already a big part of the picture. So especially in North St. Louis City and South City and the Central Corridor, they're between a half and a third of the overall housing stock. So quite a presence already. And here's just a quick sample of how some of that looks across the region. There's a really broad range of architectural styles, configurations, even within the same type, and materials across the region. And some clearly built relatively more recently, and others, much of it, much older. And of course, like James described, there's a historical context to why in St. Louis we built this stock as part of our housing in the first place. Much of it was built in the city when we had a much denser population and the need to build to accommodate that density, right? We don't have that same population density today, But I think these types still can play a very important role, which I'll come back to in a moment with a few of those thoughts. So that is what we have, but what are we building? And the answer is we're building some, but not much of these middle housing types. So just as in the nation overall, as James alluded to, the Midwest, this is data for the Midwest broadly defined, saw a real post-2000 drop-off in the construction of these 2 to 19 unit buildings, which I've highlighted in kind of these warm colors here. So we went from 16% of all new units that were building just down to 8% of new units in those types post-2000. And at the more local level, we don't have the same detailed data available, but roughly we track with the Midwest as a whole, right? So most of our development, this is again in the metropolitan statistical area, the MSA, since 2000 has been single family. That's this lightest gray. And just 4% of all of our buildings since 2000 has been in 2 to 4 unit buildings. Larger multifamily has been relatively more consistent. So that's what we have and what we're building, but that leads to the question going forward. How do we think about the role of missing middle housing types in our particular St. Louis context? And I see a few opportunities, and everyone on the panel and listening in can probably think of many, many others in light of your specific community's needs, wherever you are in the region or outside of it. But I can see at least 3 ways to think about it. So first, can missing middle help us strengthen walkable commercial districts in our region? Second, can it help us create more options for older adults to age in community? And third, can it help us preserve and create affordable options in places, especially where prices and rents are rapidly rising? Is it part of the recipe there? So I'll walk through one by one, just with a few quick illustrative thoughts here. So thinking about commercial districts, the missing middle we have was really built into the fabric of our walkable commercial districts all around the region. So here in about a quarter-mile walking radius around each of these districts that those of us living in the St. Louis region might think of as kind of the places we would go to enjoy. It's just a subset of the places we would go to enjoy these walkable districts. So it's a huge share of the housing around these districts, especially in the city, but really too in more suburban locations. The sense of place, the walkability, and relative density of buying power are kind of all part of the recipe of success of these places, I would argue. So as we think to commercial districts in our region that we would like to strengthen and build up, how can we keep these ideas about missing middle housing in the mix there? So whether that's a street like MLK Boulevard in North City or West Florissant in Ferguson, just 2 examples of many that might be priorities for our region to build up. And so especially as e-commerce, right, continues to climb and erode brick and mortar retail sales, maybe residential is a relatively larger part of the development mix in these areas and retail less. And is there a broader mix of housing types? But can missing middle housing help us rebuild these districts in a way that help them succeed in the long run, sustainable development and reinvestment in these places? So back to that second thought, how does missing middle fit into a strategy to help older adults age in community in the St. Louis region? So looking at the years ahead, these data show that older demographic segments are projected to be by far the largest share of our projected population growth. Our community, like the nation overall, really is aging. But do we have suitable housing options to support them as they enter into these new life stages and as circumstances change? And, maybe pocket neighborhoods as kind of one of those missing middle housing typologies, like this one outside of Philadelphia, can help older adults downsize into walkable, accessible options that are in community, maybe if not in place, as one in a array of options for older adults. And by the way, creating great senior housing options could help with that market churn and open up some inventory for people who are entering a stage of life or life situation where they do want that more space, and down on the line for people buying their first home, because it's all an ecosystem in the housing market. And then finally, thinking back to this national context impacting housing affordability, how can we use missing middle housing in the context of attainability, right? And by the way, how can we do it in a way that supports mixed income communities, which we know has a lot of benefits to everybody in the community for there to be socioeconomic diversity. And so around the country, and even in St. Louis, right, there are a lot of contexts to think about here. And I'll touch on just two in this final thought. So the first, in high demand inner ring suburban communities, we see really rapid appreciation right now, even and maybe especially in this older, smaller housing stock. If we think of kind of very small lot housing as part of the spectrum of missing middle housing, so something to keep in mind. So here's just one example of that rapid price appreciation to make that point. And I promise I didn't cherry pick this example. There are many other examples in communities like Afton, Webster, Kirkwood, where smaller lot homes are rapidly appreciating. So there's a lot of demand for this in the right location. But at these rates of appreciation, and because there really is a shortage of inventory for certain products in certain locations, we can't necessarily count on this older, smaller housing stock to continue offering those entry-level options in communities. It's also about adding to the housing stock in a way that creates opportunities for people at all stages of life and in different socioeconomic positions. So the second context is, of course, in urban neighborhoods that are seeing a lot of reinvestment. And that investment is really positive and important. And it's very important to keep affordability in the conversation if we want to cultivate those mixed income neighborhoods, which again, we know have all sorts of benefits and are important for so many reasons. So what are the opportunities to hold on to or use some of this missing middle housing stock to preserve affordable options, either rental options like this example here, or even also create smaller, more attainable for sale opportunities for first-time home buyers or people with lower or moderate incomes. So all of that just really scratches the surface, and I'm really excited for the other speakers' presentations that are going to dive into the details really of bringing some of these things to life. So thanks again for having me. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Miriam. Really thought-provoking presentation. Our next speaker, it comes from the development sector. Joel Oliver joined Green Street as a vice president of housing development in September of 2017. He has over 20 years of experience in real estate development, project management, modeling, acquisition, and low-income housing tax credit investments. Joel elevates Green Street's community outreach and portfolio with his ability to identify opportunities, partners, and structure complex deals and manage construction projects. Prior to joining Green Street, Joel served as a senior development manager at Gardner Capital Development. His responsibilities included deal origination, coordinating with other internal deal originators and external partners on major developments, from site identification through to completed construction. He held management positions in both community development and commercial real estate, focused on deal execution and finance, including U.S. Bancorp Community Development Corporation, Arco Construction, THF Realty, and the Cranky Group. He received an undergraduate degree from the University of Missouri-Columbia in business administration and a master's in urban planning and real estate development from St. Louis University. Welcome, Joel.
Welcome. Let's see if I can share my screen correctly here. So thrilled to be here. It's a really exciting topic, and it's a great panelist of folks discussing the topic. Green Street is based out of St. Louis, but is a national development shop. And we're active in almost every asset class. So multifamily is a large part of our portfolio, but we also have commercial, industrial, entertainment, destination entertainment. We don't do any single family homes currently, but we have partners that we work with in that space. And we have a couple of recent projects that I think are very relevant to this topic. So we're a vertically integrated company, which means that we have not only development in-house, we also have design, interior design, a sister company that's focused on incentives that helps us on the financing side, which is critically important to what we all do, and management in-house. One thing that we've been very focused on recently in the last several years that I think is very applicable to this topic is addressing workforce housing. I do have experience in the low-income housing tax credit world and in the market rate world and in the luxury housing world. And one thing we see as missing is what we call workforce housing. The national crisis, we see it in every city that we're in as being a problem. The folks that make just a little bit too much money to not be, to qualify for tax credit, but can't necessarily afford new Class A products. So that product type is a little bit different than what we're developing in other places from a pricing standpoint, which is directly tied to the product type that we're talking about. This is an interesting project that we're working on in Madison, Wisconsin. It's 65 acres and it happens to be a greenfield site, which we don't usually do greenfield sites, but is completely developed around it. So it was interesting to us. We've worked closely with the planning department in Madison on this to try to respect the comprehensive plan and neighborhood plan that are in place. And the reason that I wanted to bring it up here today is we're doing something a little different. I hope everybody can see this well enough. You don't need to be able to tell the numbers, but on the right side of my screen where my cursor is traditional multifamily buildings. So these will be, 5-story buildings like were shown earlier in the presentation, what we see all over the place. On the left side, these smaller lots are actually single family homes. What we did versus what the city had shown is these are actually smaller lots than the city had originally asked for. So they were more modest and more attainable homes for people to achieve. So we got that feedback from the community and integrated that piece. And then on the northern side, in the center of this, are actually more of a townhouse style product, which we don't do a ton of. The reason we're able to make it work here, and in another example I'll show later, is with a large project that has scale, I can introduce these different housing options because there's not a one size fits all for everyone. Some people want a smaller home, some people want a larger home, some people want to be in a heavily amenitized multifamily building. Some people don't want that. So in this particular site, we're actually providing 3 very different housing options that really only works because we have the overall scale to make that achievable. So in our housing stock, we do many of the types that were mentioned earlier. We're working on several high-rise projects right now that are 22 stories tall plus. We're working on some Texas wrap style buildings, which means you have a large central courtyard with an attached parking garage. And we're working on some smaller infill. So some examples here, the large project and the medium project that I have listed are actually both in the Forest Park Southeast neighborhood in St. Louis. For those of you here in town, kind of on the urban Chestnut end of Manchester Road. So Terra at the Grove is a 308 unit Texas wrap style building. It's 4 stories, has attached parking, and will probably be the most heavily amenitized apartment building in St. Louis. So there's some renderings on the left side of the screen that show it has a 57,000 square foot courtyard, which is the size of a football field, has a swimming pool, has a large field, has fire pits, a fitness center, all of these wonderful things, but not everybody wants that. And not everybody wants to pay for that. On the bottom right, a small project like a 4-family flat is not a product type that we actually develop, but for size wanted to show what we view that as. The medium-sized project is actually a really interesting case study and a little bit closer to what we're talking about. So this project has 6 buildings. So if you can read on the screen, there's Booker and Blake, there's Knox, there's Ash, there's Iva, and there's Marshall. Those are all named after different types of earth and soil. If you're curious where we came up with those names, because this is adjacent to the Terra at the Grove project. So these 6 buildings are financed as one development and offer a total of 168 units. These larger buildings, Booker, Blake, Knox, Iva, and Marshall, all average about 35 units per building. But, oh, I'm sorry, not Knox. So Knox and Ash are 2 smaller buildings. They're only 2 stories tall, and they're similar to like a shotgun style apartment, where you enter from the street side into the first floor, or there's a separate entrance to the second floor. That is a really, really hard product type to develop. It's expensive, and it's just difficult to do. We were able to achieve it because of the overall project scale made sense. The reason I think this is so interesting is this is directly adjacent to Terra, and so that gives you many rental options. There's also a low-income housing tax credit project that Rise Community Living developed in the neighborhood. There's brand new, very expensive single-family homes, and then there's some existing stock single-family homes, which are a little bit more affordable. So within this neighborhood, you have a very interesting case study on many different types of products. The Union at the Grove project is actually is a workforce housing project. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the details later, but some of the differences between it and Terra help explain why and how they both work. Here's some barriers that we run into all across the country in general, and I think are applicable to the missing middle concept. So the Not in My Backyard folks in our communities, in my opinion, have kind of changed and evolved in a bad way over time. Before, it was maybe people just didn't want certain types of housing. They didn't want supportive housing. They didn't want tax credit housing, Section 8 housing. It's now gone more towards they don't want multifamily in general, but they also don't want rental at all. There's this notion that if somebody's renting the place that they live, that's somehow a detriment to community, which we bristle at that assertion and see that as very, very problematic. The scale obstacles we have are, if I'm generally looking at doing a multifamily project, I want that project to have 200 units plus for it to make sense for us to be able to tackle it. The reason for that is if I'm developing a building that has 35 units or a building that has 350 units, for my staff, it's really about the same amount of work. Quite frankly, those very small infill sites in the Union project, from a constructability standpoint, are more difficult than the larger Terra project because you have no laydown yard, you're working to property lines, you have more neighbors. So there's a lot of things that are difficult there. Also, with a smaller project, it's very hard to have a robust amenity package a lot of times because A, you may not have the physical space to provide that, and you don't have the economies of scale. If I'm providing a swimming pool, for instance, for 300 units, I can make that work spreading that cost across them. But if I have a much smaller project, it's harder to incorporate those amenities. And like I said, not everybody wants to have those, so it's very market specific. Financing cuts both ways. For a smaller developer shop, a smaller project may make a lot more sense because that's something they may be able to finance more easily. But the process is still the same, and going through finding investors and lenders, you have to do scale-wise no matter what. Opportunity cost, obviously, at the end of the day, if we're looking to produce a certain number of dwelling units in a community, the opportunity cost of pursuing a much smaller project for us is something that we always have to be cognizant of. And then the certainty of execution is relevant no matter what product type we're talking about, and really goes to what municipalities allow, like was mentioned earlier. If a city does not want a certain type of housing, that's something that makes us very nervous. So when we're going into an area to pursue a project, we want to have some understanding of what the neighborhood is interested in, what elected officials are interested in, and what the city will actually allow. So here's just a quick case study on the Union at the Grove project. Let me see if I go. So here's what those 6 buildings look like specifically. As you can see, they're very different from each other. We are very sensitive to the form of architecture to have it be something that was scaled appropriately for the neighborhood and that would have architecture that would work. So this project, for context, was around $30 million for all 6 buildings. We committed to keeping 51% of these units at a workforce level for 10 years. So 51% of the units are held at 80% of the area median income. The other 49% are held at 100% of the area median income, which I understand, that may not mean anything to some of you, and be happy to answer any questions if anybody has them. Generally speaking, what that means in St. Louis would be units that are at 80% of the area median income provide about a 10% discount to a comparable market rate unit. And the person that would qualify to live in that unit would be around the starting salary of a teacher in a St. Louis public school. So say around $46,000. So every workforce project we do is a little bit different depending on who our financing partners are and what a local municipality requires. But that's a general kind of high level guidepost for what we're attempting to do. And that's a lot of pretty pictures of us. So that's a high level example, a lot of information. To be happy to answer any questions later as that makes sense.
Great, thank you, Joel. So we've heard from someone on the private consultancy side, we've heard from someone on the development side, and now we're going to hear from someone on the public sector side. So our third speaker is Paula Shea, Assistant Planning Director with the City of Norfolk. She joined the city in 1989 as a Planner 1 with a goal of making a difference. And she quickly learned that that might take a while, so she has stuck around for over 30 years to participate in the long-term transformation of Norfolk. Paula has served as a project manager for numerous plans and studies, ranging from the comprehensive plan to site-specific projects. Her current focus is on creating innovative approaches to developing a range of quality infill housing opportunities, ranging from narrow lot single-family homes to neighborhood-scale multifamily developments. Very much in keeping with the topic of this discussion. Paula has a bachelor's degree in economics from the College of William and Mary and a master's in planning from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Please welcome Paula Shea.
Need to unmute myself. Sorry about that. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Paula Shea, and I'm the Assistant Planning Director in Norfolk, Virginia. A little spoiler, I'll kind of give away the ending so you don't have to hang on to find the outcome. Norfolk, we've put our toe in the water in pursuit of missing middle housing. And I'm going to talk through our approach, but we began with the adoption of a pattern book. Lots of different ways to think about getting involved in missing middle, but that's where we began. And I'm going to walk you through what our experience has been and where we are to date. But first, before I dive into missing middle, just a little bit about Norfolk, because I understand most of you are not from the East Coast and certainly not from Norfolk. So for those of you who don't know, Norfolk is an old city. We were established as a port city in 1682. Pretty much everything about us revolves around the water, including the fact that the water wants to reclaim many parts of Norfolk. And typically, if you sign into a webinar and Norfolk's involved, it's all about sea level rise and resilience. So it's nice to talk about something a little different than that, for once. Another different fact about Norfolk is we're an independent city. We're not part of a county. It's just, something. It's not unique to Virginia, but in Virginia, we have independent cities. So we just have one level of government. We're 54 square miles, so in many ways we resemble a county in geography, and we have 144 miles of coastline. So back to that water I'm talking about. It's a widely varied coastline. We have working industrial, urban waterfronts, residential shoreline that's both natural and substantially altered, and we have over 7 miles of beaches in Norfolk. We are home to Naval Station Norfolk, which is the world's largest naval base, and also the Port of Virginia. So again, our activities are tied to the water. And perhaps the biggest factor in why missing middle is so important in Norfolk is we're 97% developed. We don't have greenfield development. We either have small lot infill or wholesale redevelopment to see new development in Norfolk. And then Norfolk, we're part of Hampton Roads. So Hampton Roads, Virginia, for those of you who aren't aware, we are in the southeast corner of the state of Virginia. We stretch down to the North Carolina border on the south, the Atlantic Ocean on the east, Chesapeake Bay, and lots of other bodies of water running through us. We are southeast of Richmond, Virginia, which is the capital of Richmond, and south of south of Washington, D.C., just to put us in context. We have over 1.7 million residents, and again, the federal government and defense is our #1 employer. So getting to the topic of missing middle, the challenge, the need for affordable housing is well documented. I'm not going to go into that here. I think we're all believers. Anybody who signs into this webinar already knows we need affordable housing and we need solutions. And we've also heard today about missing middle housing, what it is, and the fact that it is one viable solution. So I'm going to move on to the Norfolk specific challenges of implementing missing middle. And these are universal problems. It's not specific to just Norfolk. The challenge that we need to address here in Norfolk is kind of twofold as we see it. The first is that NIMBYism issue. It's pretty much the fact that anything beyond single family detached housing is seen as less desirable, at its best. We've already talked about that. And this is a long history. And, I have to admit it was facilitated by planners. It's, we own up to this, that we created this exclusive single family zoning for lots of different reasons. And now we're seeing the outcome of that. So how do we overcome this? And then the second challenge we're trying to deal with is we already utilize things like low-income tax credit programs, project-based vouchers, mortgage subsidies, inclusionary housing. We have all these programs that are pretty heavy-handed, but what does it take to get the market to kick in and provide some of these other housing options? What are the barriers that are in the way, and how can we better either facilitate it or get the heck out of the way to get this missing middle housing? And wanted to point out, we've had some recent success here in Norfolk with developing a market approach to providing some of this infill housing. Now, this example we have is for single family infill housing, but our approach here is we developed something called a traditional neighborhoods plan book, where we facilitated the development of more what we're calling naturally affordable housing, smaller housing, in the form of single family infill on some small lots. So just to dive into that, just because this kind of formed the basis of how we are thinking about implementing missing middle. We have a neighborhood in Norfolk that set goals, and their goals were to increase home ownership and fill in some missing teeth. They had over 100 vacant lots in the neighborhood. However, these were narrow lots. They were 25 feet wide. And we know what we did with zoning, where we came in and we said, even if a neighborhood was developed on these 25-foot lots, we came in with zoning that required development on a 50-foot lot. Therefore, we made everything non-conforming and we made it next to impossible for anything new to be built. So we worked with the neighborhood on how can these lots be developed with complementary homes that would increase home ownership in the neighborhood. So we rezoned the neighborhood back to allow development on these narrow lots by right. But we said only if you build one of our house plans. And in this case, we actually gave construction drawing house plans to builders who would build on these 25-foot lots. And we upgraded the materials that were required to try to support lifetime affordability, better siding, better systems inside, things like that. And we've developed over 30 new single-family homes in this struggling neighborhood. This is a struggling neighborhood that are almost all homeowners. I think of the 30 or so, 2 are occupied by renters. The rest are new homeowners or renters who have achieved homeownership in this neighborhood. So we thought, could a similar approach work for missing middle? So our approach is multi-layered. We needed to figure out how to get the public to buy in. We needed to deal with the specifics of zoning. We needed to address other barriers and create opportunities for missing middle. So our first step was to develop a pattern book. This is done in lots of places. There's lots of pattern books out there for missing middle, but we modeled the process after the traditional neighborhood plan book approach. But instead of resulting in actual construction documents, we developed it more as a kit of parts. We began by defining and illustrating missing middle in the community to begin to address that NIMBYism that we were seeing. We heard before about the definition of missing middle, so I will move on. But these are the examples. These are Norfolk-specific examples to show people where this exists in their community. Most of these are older, but we have a few newer ones that have been built in some of our new communities. And basically, we wanted to illustrate how these seamlessly fit into their neighborhoods. And even though people might have a negative perception of multifamily housing, when they see these photos, these are actual homes they cherish in their neighborhoods. In fact, there's an example. I heard the term six-pack used earlier. In Norfolk, we have these throughout our community. We have these what's known as the Norfolk six-pack. It's the 3-story side-by-side 2 units going up, and these are throughout our community, and they're occupied by renters. Some of them have turned to co-ops, some are condos, but these do not have a negative history. These are actually embraced by the community. So the plan book further then goes on more to this kit of parts, and this is to try to direct builders on how do you think about missing middle? How do you build it? And there's a series of floor plans that are provided that are anywhere from 1 to 3 bedroom layouts, live work units. We have interchangeable elevations that are provided just to show how you can, these can be styled to fit into any of the communities within Norfolk, to put them in context. We also spell out the construction type to be resilient and sustainable, and we have approved materials. And the reason this is important is that when we get to the zoning, which I'll go to next, is we condition it back to meeting the criteria in the plan, in the pattern book. So step 2 is developing a zoning district that allows the by right development of missing middle. The last thing we want to do is require somebody to get a conditional use permit or go through a rezoning process. We want to get out ahead of this and say, look, if you build this, it's a by right type of development. We embrace it. We want it. So we chose an area where we were already working with the community called Broad Creek. We had the relationship already with this neighborhood, and they had some goals that they set. They really wanted to stimulate new development in their community and create some housing opportunities. And there are available properties in this community. So we met with them, and they bought in to the concept of missing middle, and that we rezoned. We created an overlay zoning district that allows for the development of missing middle in a portion of this neighborhood. We tied the development back to the pattern book in terms of design, massing, location arrangement, things like that. The zoning district references it. And we allow by right development of everything up to a 12 unit building in this community. Anything over 12 units, we want the conditional use permit. And the reason we do that is to really try to support the smaller infill as opposed to somebody doing a more of a large scale apartment building. And the real key to the zoning working, if the zoning is going to work, is we pretty much eliminated the parking requirement or drastically reduced it, because parking is probably the number one barrier in zoning to being able to implement missing middle. And then we also have laid out an approach that of where we're going to make future zoning changes and how we're going to map this out, a kind of along the lines of where is it appropriate to have missing middle? Where are these walkable communities? And in Norfolk, we're tying it to we have something called character districts, and we have a kind of a quasi form-based code zoning that follows these character districts. And we are going to take a look at our traditional character district, that in orange, to do the next phase of zoning changes to support missing middle housing. So we've laid out a plan going forward as to which neighborhoods we want to work with to make this happen. Now, the third step kind of evolves because, again, this is a layered approach, and trying to figure out all our barriers to missing middle they kind of reveal themselves. I kind of think of it actually, or peel off. It's more like an onion. We first dealt with the neighborhoods and NIMBYism. Then we dealt with our zoning requirements, such as parking. But now the biggest challenge we're trying to figure out how to get some of these smaller builders to scale up to missing middle is site plan. We anything more than a single family home requires full site plan review. And there's lots of good reasons for that. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but and the biggest barrier are things like stormwater calculations, dealing with quantity and quality, maybe meeting our landscaping requirements. In our zoning ordinance, we have resilience requirements, back to how we're going to deal with water. So what we did was we hired a consultant team to develop a model site plan that has pre-populated information and then different options for dealing with things that they can drop in. This work is underway right now. It's actually a lot more challenging than it sounds. And it does sound challenging, but these things are engineered and it's site specific. So to come up with a model has been hard, but that's our approach. We are going to try to have this model site plan so that somebody who is new to the multifamily world will have this resource available as they try to build missing middle. And then some additional, steps we're taking, or, what else can we do to try to incentivize the private sector to come in? We are pursuing a pilot project. We have several interested builders, and we're targeting that orange area, that traditional character district area, to do a missing middle project. We are in the process of developing an RFP for a city-owned lot, that site that's can accommodate a good bit of missing middle, but we are encountering some NIMBYism with the neighborhood. So we actually had to take a step back, and we're trying to illustrate specifically on that site what missing middle might look like for them. We have a Choice Neighborhood Initiative project, and we're exploring doing a cottage court for seniors on a small portion of that property to demonstrate that and missing middle in that area. And we're doing additional zoning amendments. For example, we're factoring in the thought of missing middle in everything we do. We just eliminated parking requirements in the floating historic districts. But instead of just outright eliminating it for all uses, we decided to keep the parking requirement in place for residential developments of 25 plus units. Thus, we were incentivizing missing middle coming in, these smaller apartment buildings, which were much more appropriately scaled for the historic districts. And so the question becomes, have we done enough to tip the scales to get the private sector on board in the neighborhoods? And we're still early in the process. But what we actually have found along the way is we've identified more challenges that, there's a lot more steps we have to take to implement missing middle. So, And with that, I provide my contact information and I will turn it back over to James.
All right, excellent, Paula. That was a really, really great presentation. All three presentations, and as I said earlier, coming from three different vantage points, from the sort of consultant's point of view, from the developer's point of view, and from the public official's point of view. You know, I know we're soliciting questions through the chat, but I'd like to. Everybody has mentioned the issue of NIMBYs. Okay. And, you know, in many cities around the country, you're starting to see the emergence of what they call YIMBYs, the yes in my backyards, the people who are actually advocating for this. What are your thoughts on how do you overcome the NIMBY resistance to create that kind of positive advocacy for these types of projects? I mean, we know they meet a demographic need. We know they meet an economic need, but there's resistance. And Paula, I'll probably start with you because it seems like you've given this the most thought. But you know, Joel and Miriam, I'd be interested in your thoughts. How do we flip the public view of these types of projects?
Good question. The NIMBYs, as you know, they fall into a couple different categories. The one category is, I'm calling them the hardcore NIMBYs. And we just can't let them be the loudest voice, is the approach to that. We're not going to change their mind. The idea that to find advocates that speak from the community, that speak in a positive way and support this is absolutely what needs to happen. I spoke at a forum on Saturday night. It wasn't about missing middle, but it was about future challenges and approaches, you know, and what this. It was a very engaged group, and the people that came to that are the ones that are out there and starting these movements to try to facilitate change. And so we're trying to always engage them and bring them in to counter the group that are always going to say no. We're not going to change their mind. We just need to find somebody to be a little louder than them. And then what we've also found to be the best thing for us to go forward is to have our elected officials on board. We have to have people brave enough to vote in favor of these things, even in the face of opposition. And we find that with our low-income housing tax credit projects is the number one thing. When we try to do them in community, we were trying to approve multifamily development in communities of what we call communities of opportunity, where we don't have the concentrations of poverty, where it's not just minority communities where we're putting these. And those communities come out and they speak loudly, and our politicians have still voted in favor of it. So I think education is the number one thing we can do.
Okay. Joel or Miriam, any thoughts?
Yeah, what I'd say, two quick things. We recently were working on a project in an affluent community and that does not have a lot of rental options. And a previous elected official stood up at a meeting and very kind of vitriolically said, well, no one comes to this community to be a renter. People come to live in this community to be homeowners, very matter-of-factly, and really believed that very deeply. And we simply countered with, well, there's no rental options here now. So I don't know that the one is indicative of the other, right? And the thing that I find myself saying more and more often when I'm talking to elected officials is what we see people want is a true sense of community. People want to have the option of investing themselves in the area that they live, that they work, where their kids go to school, whatever the thing is. And when we don't provide options for people in these various communities, you force people to split their investment of themselves. So if you're a teacher in a district, but there's nowhere to live in your town and you have to drive 45 minutes away because that's the only housing option, that's not a good option for the community as a whole. You know, not everybody will choose to do that. People may choose to live somewhere further away, but when you give people the option of investing their whole selves in the area they live, it's better for the community as a whole.
Really, really nicely stated. Miriam, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think the only things I would add, I think like Paula said, you're not going to persuade everybody, but it's a matter of, providing information and education to people who you might be persuaded. And I think in Joel's presentation describing, what does 80% AMI mean? I think that's exactly part of it, just describe who the people are that would be living here. I know as a housing policy person, I'm often tempted to think in terms of AMI numbers and charts and graphs and leave it there. It's like, you have to take that extra step to do just as Joel did, which is, that's a teacher in your community. And like, we need people to make our communities work. We need people across the income spectrum able to live here.
Right.
And yeah, I think the only kind of other thoughts, or maybe just kind of reiterating what Paula said, I think to the degree fewer of these tough decisions that can be, discretionary, just making more things as of right, where they are tied to an overall plan. And I think emboldening decision makers where there are, cases of discretion. I think part of that emboldening or education is that there is a broader strategy or a broader plan that they can point to and say, this is not a case where we're doing one thing or the other. It's like, as a community, we have decided in principle that we have embraced these goals, and that is why we are doing this. I think that can be helpful in that empowerment.
Yeah, I'd also add one new product type that we didn't touch on here that's actually really interesting, and how communities are responding to everything we're talking about is, in people's minds, single family homes are, generally speaking, home ownership options. Like, obviously people rent homes all the time, but with the advent of opportunity zones, something that we're seeing is now developers are building single family home neighborhoods that are structured as an opportunity zone financing structure, which then you have these huge investment funds are buying those, and they're rental properties for 10 years. And the public at large, I don't think understands that. So they have this notion that apartments are bad because people are renting. But a lot of developers are now building whole subdivisions that are rental subdivisions. And it's interesting watching how communities are responding to that as a whole new kind of asset class.
So, I mean, you need to distinguish between the housing type as a built form and the ownership structure by which it, they might say we're against rental, and then you point out that all the single family units in this development are actually rentals, and it's confusing because there's a disconnect between the idea that single family automatically means ownership, anything else means rental.
Right.
And we know that's not the case. I did want to follow up on an issue that Paula raised, and it is often one of the reasons why you do get some NIMBYism, which is when you increase the density of development on a lot, parking becomes a bit of a challenge. And again, Paula, maybe start with you because you've explicitly pointed it out. If you have 6 units on a lot that maybe only originally held a single family unit, how do you address the parking challenge?
Good question. I often say, in our planning department, if you have 12 planners in a room, you have 20 opinions, and parking is one of those where when we get together as planners, we fight. But as we all know, we've done a much better job in this country in planning for cars than we have for people. I mean, when you see the studies of the amount of there's more parking, there's outside of New York City, there's 4 times as many parking spaces as there are vehicles in this country, something crazy like that. So we're back to education again. People, there's a lot of parking along curbs that, while it's not fun to not have your own dedicated parking space at all times, if you take a closer look at the communities, is there sufficient on-street parking to meet that demand? Are there other multimodal options available? Is this housing going in areas that has those other opportunities? And is it attracting the type of resident that wants options? We have communities where we require parking, yet the market they're serving a lot of them don't even use cars anymore. So we need to make allowances for that and really understand what the supply actually is there. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Rachel, I assume you've been collecting some questions from the audience.
Yes, we have quite a few. Thank you so much for everyone for attending and writing in your questions. First question from the audience. There is a lot of demand for the missing middle. Airbnb is taking units off the market that would otherwise be occupied by folks who might need workforce housing. Any thoughts on what we should be doing to be reasonable around this trend?
I can give you my opinion on that. We actually see more and more cities banning Airbnbs, and as the owner of properties, we actually don't allow our tenants to use their units as Airbnbs because by and large it's very destructive. So, you know, from the development side, we're not allowing it in our apartment buildings.
Paula, is that an issue in Norfolk?
I hate Airbnbs. Short-term rentals are the bane of our existence right now because I mentioned the 7 miles of beaches that we have. Our beaches, however, I mean, aren't that the properties are developed with small multifamily buildings. Some of it which would be this missing middle. However, it's not the cute missing middle that I showed in the photos. It's some pretty ugly stuff in pretty bad shape. I mean, and we have operators coming in and buying these 6-unit buildings and converting them to short-term rentals. And they used to be illegal and we had 400 of them registered. So in the city on, you know, when you went to the platforms, we had 400 units available when they were illegal and we weren't getting any money off of them. So we said, well, let's have a vehicle to make them legal and charge some money and get some staff to go in and enforce. Well, it's a moving target. We are debating what's the impact on the affordable housing market and everything. But, you know, if somebody has the magic answer out there, I'd be more than happy. We are processing our next round of short-term rental amendments. It's amendment 2.5 because we're only halfway with where we want to be. And this morning I already got an email on, well, what's 3.0 and whether we put caps on the number or anything like that, distance requirements, all of the above.
Well, sounds like a really interesting topic that we need to continue to discuss as we go forward. Rachel, anything else?
Next question. Recently, St. Louis Board Bill 29 proposed to charge developers a $10,000 fee to convert multifamily buildings to single home. What are your thoughts on how this will preserve our remaining missing middle housing?
Well, Miriam, I know we were talking about this at the beginning of the discussion, so I'll let you go first on this one.
Yeah, I can share my thoughts, and I haven't reviewed the proposal in detail other than kind of the headlines in the news. Yeah, I do think we need a broader strategy for preserving affordability in neighborhoods that are receiving a lot of investment, and I think this is a tool to keep in the toolbox. I think it's not the only one, though, and I think I believe the proposal is that those fines would fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which is such an important tool and source of all different types of work in the city. And there are lots and lots of options for how to fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and expand the impact that people with that support are able to make. So yeah, I think it's a very kind of interesting opportunity and idea and tool. Yeah, I think it's good to have it in the conversation for sure.
Joel, do you have any thoughts on this?
No, that's not really something we would do. I mean, we may convert a property like that to a bigger project, but probably not smaller.
Right.
Next question, in educating about advocating for missing middle, what have you found as the most compelling arguments for increasing residential density in primarily single family areas?
Well,
Paula,
I
you
can,
wanna-
yeah, I can try. The first thing is if you read The Missing Middle, the book, we don't use the word density. It's the first thing, because density is like a cuss word out there in the community. That's a really bad word. So we're increasing housing opportunities, those types of things. And that is really the argument when you present it to people as, again, not everyone, but you make it personal to them. You say, well, where are your children going to live when they're adults? Where do you envision them living? Because we're not creating any additional housing opportunities if we don't, in Norfolk, that's 97% developed, unless we add housing units on existing property. We have to increase the number of housing units with the same supply of land. And we try to get them to do it. So by and large, we redid our zoning ordinance in 2018, and we added in accessory dwelling units by right in most of our zoning districts. And it did not take off because the economics of building an accessory dwelling unit, that's a whole nother webinar you can have. And I'd love to learn more about it, but I understand the economics are not there. We can allow them, but it doesn't produce them. So in effect, we doubled the density without anybody ever even noticing. So, and then we've gone to much smaller, allowable, smaller lots for single family. So, we're just eating at the edges of it. But Missing Middle and that pilot zoning district, we really did up the allowable density in a community by working directly with them so they could see what it would look like.
I mean, selfishly, we want things to work. So we're, we never want to develop something that is not going to be successful. So we always try to be very sensitive to the scale of what's around a project. We always try to make sure that there's the correct infrastructure to support it, whether that be traffic, utilities, schools, the public service side of things. So for us, increasing density isn't always the right answer. It's really just trying to be very sensitive and, propose something that fits correctly on the right site. Because we don't want to go in and fight with people. I pass on way more opportunities than we ever actually pursue. So if I have to fight somebody because it's not scaled right, that's not good business.
Doesn't sound very selfish. Well, and I think this gets back to the, of course, the NIMBYism conversation we were having earlier. And just one other thought I had, which I've never tried this argument specifically, but I've heard it suggested. I think a lot of homeowners in their community, and maybe some of the people who are most vocal in opposition, maybe they've owned their home a really long time and bought in a market that's just very different than the one we have right now. And so, the question of like, hey, could you afford to buy the home you live in today? Or could your kid afford to buy a home that you live in today? I think kind of painting a picture of how things have really changed in terms of attainability in the housing market in the last couple of decades. Again, it's not going to persuade everybody, but could be part of the conversation.
Yeah, a little follow-up with similar question. Many of our planning challenges today stem from decisions planners and political leaders in our past, all of whom were doing what they thought was the best for the time. How can we make better planning decisions to mitigate some of these for future generations?
Well, I'll jump in. I'm not multitasking right now. I'm not spot on, but the APA National Convention the virtual one is going on right now as we speak. And there are 2 sessions that are coming up that I am quite excited as a planner to learn about. One is the interstate highway system and how some communities are looking at removing or moving the interstate because the decisions that were made involving everybody, including the planning community, historically, pretty much destroyed the fabric of a lot of Black and other Black and immigration group communities over time. I mean, and those decisions were consciously made, and it may not have been what was best for the community. I agree with the quotes. I mean, that was made. So there's a session on that. And so that's one example. And single family zoning is probably the best example. We came up with single family detached zoning, and it's in Norfolk, it's a third of our land area is zoned for single family, which is just insane when you think about it, because the naval base takes up a quarter, almost a quarter of our property is a naval base. So when you think about single family zoning in a very urban area, and then everybody else lives in much smaller lots or in multifamily housing. It is that dichotomy, and that was created by planners. So hopefully we're smarter, and there's a session later on getting rid of single family zoning. So I'm going to go to that too. Yeah.
Mary, you want to take the next question?
Sure. So multifamily development units, 2 to 4 unit small buildings allow for folks to own or occupy. There's also a rise in need for multi-generational housing. How do we get more folks to understand the need for multi-generational housing, such as young people living with their parents, but their own space, or having parents living with family members?
Well, we may have hit a live wire on that one. I think that the experience of the last 2 years with dealing with COVID has probably helped shift that argument a little bit. A lot of people have had to go back into some sort of a multi-generational setting for whatever reason. And, I've seen several articles mentioning that they're discovering that it's not all bad, that there are some real benefits to this. And, historically, if you go back 100 years, many families had multi-generational aspects to them, whether it was an elder parent living with you or children coming back, et cetera. And I guess getting to Paula's point, I think in the post-war period to build building interstate highways and single family zoning, we sort of forgot a lot of that. And unfortunately now, the regulations are in effect. And so everything you do has to overcome the existing regulations. One of the great statistics that is out there, and I know this is a general statistic, not a specific statistic, is that in 1960, just under 50% of all the households in America were the nuclear family. Okay. And in the last one I looked at, which I think is 2020, the single largest household demographic is an individual adult living alone. And then the second largest is 2 adults without children living with them. So the nuclear family has now dropped to the third, which I think is about 21% of all the households. So what we're saying is the regulations and our demographics actually don't align anymore. But the challenge is to overcome the inertia of 60 years of regulations that will now have to be overcome. And certainly one of the arguments I've heard for allowing ADUs, accessory dwelling units, is that allows you, the traditional mother-in-law apartment, whether it's a mother-in-law or an adult child who comes back and needs a place to live. It allows you to create those multi-generational households while maintaining sort of the standard single-family zoning. So. And I would think in Paula's case, you've just changed your zoning to allow for ADUs. I'd say give it 5 years and let's see how things start to transition.
The next question, does your pattern book speak on contingency plans to support resilience?
I guess that's for me, because I'm the one who talked about a pattern book. I'm not sure what contingency plans mean, but in terms of resilience, it addresses resilience. First of all, our zoning, we already have enhanced requirements for resilience for all new construction or substantial rehab in Norfolk. So everything from requiring 3 foot of freeboard above base flood elevation to all mechanical equipment has to be out of the flood zone, elevated. If you're in a flood zone, you can't have duct work in your crawl space. unless it also has to be raised out or the space has to be conditioned. I forget the actual term. And then we have a lot of other things that people have to do. You have to do a certain tree canopy preservation or replacement, all these different things that lead to more resilience in the long term and deal with more water and all those other things. We require convenience stores to have generators now. Who would have used so that you can still go and get, I joke and say, so I can get the Slurpee after a hurricane, but it's, for the ice and, sometimes convenience stores are the place people go after a disaster. They're the only things that open back up. So we already have a lot of resilience in the zoning ordinance. That the pattern book speaks to requiring, we require the use of, for example, in Huntersville, you have to use 2x6s for the wall construction instead of 2x4s to get that extra installation and to save on heating and cooling bills and long-term improvements like that. So we have some of that in there.
I have a question representing a main street here on South Grand as a community improvement district. Throughout the country, we're seeing a lot of main streets starting to close up because of e-commerce, but also not enough housing options for people who work in those main streets in those neighborhoods. So their commute becomes too long to get to work at that main street if they're working at a hair salon or retail shop or a restaurant as a server or bartender. So I think, is there a correlation, like we're talking with different households today, what James was mentioning, this can be really hurting our commerce of keeping our main streets strong, which in turn would affect the property value of these single family homes in their neighborhood if their main street starts to shutter. What data is out there that you have seen, Miriam, on stuff like this to help encourage more missing middle around main streets throughout the country and in the St. Louis region, to show, hey, if you really want that coffee at your local coffee shop, we really need to have housing in our neighborhoods for them.
I think it's a great point, and I think it also kind of points to the importance of or transit accessibility to housing opportunities, transit and transportation. We're working in a community right now that has a very, very large part of their economy that's focused on tourism, and a lot of it just can't operate because people just don't want to take those jobs anymore. That might be putting them at risk from a health point of view, but it's also an hour commute down to whatever resort or job in the tourism economy. And so I think it's starting to get some wheels turning about, like, maybe we need to think about land use in a different way, or transit in a different way, or both in a different way. So yeah, I know it's not a great answer to the question about data, but yeah, I just think that's so relevant in so many places.
And I know the state of New York is working on passing legislation to build more housing around transit stops because they have pushed so many people out from New York City that they can't afford to live in the city to work. And that's affecting a lot of these restaurants and services and businesses there, that they don't have enough affordable housing for their staff to work at. And they're changing their hours because they can't even be the 24-hour city anymore, because there's just not enough housing options to make it work for them to work at their business. So I know New York is working on legislation with that. So it's really interesting what we need to be thinking about and going forward.
Yeah, we're finishing up a project in Sheboygan, Wisconsin right now, which is a super interesting market if you know anything about it. There's a lot of huge private companies headquartered there. And the reason we went there is that's Kohler's international headquarters. And they were busing people 45 minutes every day from Milwaukee because there was nowhere to live. And their unemployment rate's 2.3%. So looking at markets like that from a development standpoint creates a real challenge, because their daytime population is extremely different from their nighttime population, but it's because there weren't housing options. So if you try to underwrite it like a normal deal, it's bizarre. So from what you're saying, they're having a lot of their businesses shut because their industrial manufacturing side is so robust that people aren't doing those service jobs that you need for a community to thrive. So it's like this terrible cycle, right? You know, if you can make $30 an hour working at a cheese factory, putting cheese in a box, you're probably not going to work at the local restaurant. If you're not looking at the local restaurant, you know, what's the quality of life? So creating those housing options for people to kind of help the whole community thrive is, it's tough, and it takes everybody rowing in the same direction to make it work.
And how is that in Norfolk, Paula? Because I grew up on the Jersey Shore, so I know the beach is a high commodity of tourism. And if you have restaurants and bars, you know, where's people living that work for these small businesses?
I think the challenge is the same. Yeah, they're having trouble getting workers. There's a competition. However, in the Norfolk market, I'm going to say, unfortunately, you know, our wages are kind of low here. We're, you know, so they're not living wages either. But we don't have the same, there is no manufacturing that pays $30 an hour to go to. We just don't have that, or, you know, so, and the military, they come with a housing allowance built in. So it's a little, the housing market is a little skewed because of that. So, but yes, we have the same problems finding workers for fast food and restaurants and retail and the like.
And hopefully, like what you were talking earlier is about education. That's the whole point to our public advocacy committee, is to educate people about what's going on. And if more people understand why missing middle is so important and why we have to look at our zoning regulations in a different way to make sure we have the housing for the people who work in these areas, that they have affordable housing. So it's exciting what's being put out there and what you're working on, and seeing what the future of development can be in St. Louis and throughout our country. Is there any other questions, Mary, that I haven't noticed anything else in the chat?
No, I think we got all of them.
Yeah. Anything else, James, that you feel we should be asking in the panel?
No, I think that we've clearly hit on a very important topic. Doesn't lend itself, I think, to any easy answers. You know, I think several of the speakers have mentioned that the need for education of the public, education of the electeds, you know, just education generally. You know, I would say the one other element that we've talked a little bit about, but haven't really followed up on, is what will it take to create the kind of local focused developers who will become expert at doing this kind of work? Because clearly it's not the kind of thing that a big national developer will do. Maybe it's an extrapolation from the single family developers, but it sounds like it's an opportunity. Several people have mentioned the idea of growing community. Well, having developers who are expert at doing 2, 4, 6, 8 unit developments, particularly if these are on infill lots, I think really can help build that sense of a community, while also creating local employment, local opportunities as well. So there's a market there that I'm sure in a lot of cities is not yet tapped.
Great. Well, thank you so much to the panel for being on today and discussing missing middle housing. And we'll be sending out a survey to all those attendees today to get feedback on the webinar. And again, thank you for all your hard work on what you're doing in the community and making missing middle housing a reality. So thank you to all of you.
Great. Thank you, Rachel, for setting this up.
My pleasure.
Thanks for having me.